Anyone's capable of reading the words and understanding what they say, but that's one thing. If you're going to tread that path, there will be much more knowledge underneath everything. And no one who hasn't worked their mark can tell what's underneath that until they have.
Today on the Glitch Bottle podcast, diving deep into the fundamentals of Solomonic magic with magician, author, and meticulous practitioner, Mr. Julio Cesar Ody. Salutations, listeners, and welcome to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander Eth, and today on the podcast, Julio Cesar Ody joins us to talk about his new book from Scarlet Imprint called Magister Officiorum. The book details Giulio's use of the fundamentals of Solomonic magic, the place of evocation, the circle, the liber spiritum, the robes, the black-handled knife, and so much more. But what makes Giulio's work interesting as well as his no-nonsense practical approach to evocation, as well as how his approach is informed by other strands in the Western magical tradition, including Espiritismo and Obeah. Now, Giulio is from Brazil and currently resides in Australia. His lifelong pursuit of the mysteries began when he was young, performing seances and experiments with the Book of Saint Cyprian and so many more experiences. In this episode, we dive deep into the Solomonic method, the preparation of tools, working with a king of the four directions in evocation, ritual purity, and so much more. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Mr. Julio Cesar Ody. Julio, thank you so much for coming on the Glitch Bottle podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Can you just talk about your background a little bit and share with our listeners about your background and the genesis of this book?
Yeah, well, I'm Brazilian born, and what I was doing back in Brazil definitely wasn't Solomonic magic at all. Like, I think some of that material had already made its way to America. Of course, it had, but it wasn't as propagated as it now is. So perhaps the last 20 years made a lot of difference, especially because coming in with English, that I could read English from a young age. That would have made things easier, but back in the day, that wasn't the case. So in the beginning of everything, I think my first experiences were with Spiritism, which, we had plenty there. And by Spiritism, I mean the Kardecian variety of it. This was something I had occasion to explain in a few other places, that Spiritism really is an umbrella term. It's not one thing. It's not, one religion or practice or cult. It has been had in many different ways in the Americas and different countries, and it has been more of a sorcerer's sort of thing in certain countries than Brazil. So the Kardecian variety is a Christian Spiritism of sorts, which still frames all its beliefs against certain things of the Bible. Granted, it's not in accordance with the Bible all in all, but it nevertheless is heavily Christianized. So that was perhaps the first serious endeavor that I did in my life, and that meant that I was going a lot to Kardecian houses and temples, and I was I was present in their operations. I was seeing what they were doing, and even though, again, they were probably don't agree most of the dogma that they preach with regards to, they have beliefs such as there are no demons out there. There's just bad people that died and doing bad things, and they're misguided and they're not elevated. So, which I heavily disagree with, but even I disagreed even back in the day. So even though I was sitting there and I was hearing them say these things, but I still had the lingering sensation in me that, okay, this is like, they don't have the whole picture, but they were still very competent necromancers, or so were the people that I met, as in they could work with the dead very well, and a lot of the work that they did meant really to call forth the dead and to repeatedly do so with the same spirits to try and help them, which is part of the discipline in Spiritism, which is to help spirits elevate and to figure out what situation they're in and to free themselves from the cycle of repetition, which, to be honest, according to what we discussed just now, you and I, in that film The Others, it's quite well portrayed that, the woman and her family they're stuck in a house and they have no idea, why. It's just a thing. It's a mix of a condition and a physical, as far as they're concerned, constraint in them. And that in Spiritism is quite heavy, that belief. So spirits they're stuck in houses by beliefs that, I can't leave this place because I'm waiting for someone to come back. But then that has been going on for years, as far as they're concerned, and they can't leave. They can't bring themselves to. And during the time that they live there, they're haunting the place, but they're not necessarily trying to haunt the place. They're confused about what they're seeing. They're confused about what other people are doing. They're catching glimpses of what's going on in our world, which may be interfering with their world. And for them, everything is scary, and they react to it, and they get angry at it, and a lot of things happen. So that's very much Spiritism in a nutshell for the variety I was in. So that was my background for a while until the Book of Saint Cyprian came into the picture, and then the experience took a different, route. Again, both of these things, they're very different from Solomonic magic in essence. They're very, they're like to try to conflate even the Book of Saint Cyprian with Solomonic magic is a mistake. That book is a collection of, remedies and spells and things which were part of different traditions, and then they were put together in the same book, which Solomonic magic may follow a similar ruling to how the manuscripts got written, but they definitely haven't necessarily sourced from the same set of techniques from one another. So, my background in Solomonic magic is something that fell into the picture much later in my life than these other things.
And to that point, Giulio, you also have an extensive experience in Obeah, if I'm pronouncing that right. Can you talk about this in terms of kind of what you touch on in the book? For those who aren't familiar, what is Obeah, and why did you decide to make that a very important part of your new book?
Well, I'll probably answer in reverse. I find that you went into the book because there's a tribute to be paid to it, which is the fact that my Obeah practice realigned the Solomonic magic that I had been doing for a while, a long time before Obeah actually came into the picture as well. Indeed, yes, it has become very big in my magic practice, but it has been more of a force driving to a redirection or a realignment of the Solomonic practice than a thing that got mixed with the Solomonic practice itself. So it was more of a, we acknowledge you are doing all these other things and they are actually very important to you and to what you're meant to do. So we are going to fix how your understanding of that, and we're going to tell you how to do it better. And they were very right in how it happened. So essentially what I had been for a long time doing, what would be considered the necromancy, as it's called within Solomonic magic, and or negromancy, which is that, the darker side of actually working these spirits through offerings and whatnot. And there were very good experiences. There were very instructive experiences to be had in it, but definitely I can understand. I now have a very good understanding, I think, of what one thing does and what the other thing does, and they're not the same thing at all. And there's a very big impact and a difference to the kinds of results you get and to the kind of outcomes that you get with the operations. So yes, Obeah is there as this tribute, as a force of realignment behind all that. And now to answer what Obeah is, now that's a very big question. There have been a number of historians that traveled to the Caribbean along the years, in the last 100 years alone, trying to write down what they saw. And you get glimpses in history books about them telling stories of people who, they visited the Obeah man to get a favor done or to get a job or to find a partner or whatnot. And that kind of thing still happens. Like, it's still quite commonplace in many countries in the Caribbean, and also even if you'll find that in classifieds in London, actually. There's Obeah men working there and Obeah women working there too, that, they'll sort you out with an issue if you pay them a certain amount of money. So that public face to what Obeah isn't a secret at all. Like that happens, and that is just a thing people do, like many other sorcerers in many other religions and countries as well. that's not new. But the internals of Obeah is more complicated to be discussed. But to be honest, I mean, what I can say about it is that it's not one thing at all. Of all the oral traditions that I can think of, I think Obeah is the most moving and different than the others. Because even if you take, well, I don't want to draw unfair comparisons to things I'm not, but I can speak about Makaya, which I am in. And Makaya is very different in how it's had by different sorcerers in different places in the same country. And Obeah is very similar to that too, in that what some people call Obeah in Jamaica may be very different than what people call Obeah in Trinidad. And same goes for the Bahamas, same goes for Suriname, same goes for a number of other countries there too. But the initiatory component of Obeah, this transmission, that is the that is very present in all of these. I mean, I'm not going to generalize and say it's in all of them, but it's likely that it is. And that is fundamental because the awakening of the fire is an essential step for you to practice Obeah. You can't practice it without the initiation, without this transmission.
You mentioned this in the book about the fire, and this procedure of an initiatory practice and an initiatory operation. Can you talk about that? Because I think a lot of listeners might not be too familiar, aside from something, and I'm not drawing a comparison, but like with the sacred rites of Abramelin and the HGA and bonding to your holy guardian angel. Can you touch on that in terms of what is the fire? What is the spark? How does this bond to the aspirant? How does this whole thing work?
Yeah, within Obeah at least, I mean, and that in no way relates to Solomonic magic at all, because Solomonic magic doesn't have that sort of thing. Like, it has a mythological component in one alleyway of Solomonic magic, which is the retreat that King Solomon did to his temple, which for a few days or a certain period of time in which he prayed very hard, and then the Archangel Michael appears to him and gives him the ring. So that that myth is a potential allusion to a reception of a fire from a spirit, which then, so then he proceeded to just go and call forth several spirits and bind them. That is similar in a way, but a key difference to that is that, Solomon was in a myth initiated by a spirit, which is not exactly what happens in Obeah. You're initiated by a person. And again, it's the same with a number of other, African originated cults and New World cults, that you're initiated by a person, not by a spirit. Now, the fire itself it's tricky to explain. I think what it does to you is really, it gives you access to a small set of spirits in most cases, and what that does, it just lights a fire in you, which is very small in the beginning, but then you work on it and it becomes bigger, and then as it becomes bigger, then those spirits will reveal other, things, other potentials to you, which then can develop into other spirits being brought into the fold and so on. But this is a very broad generalization of what happens, because this may not happen at all to some people. Obeah may really mean you working with one or two spirits which you received in the course of the transmission, and that being that for you. Or it may mean a number of other things, so it really is anyone's guess as to how that's going to develop in you. So in a way, it could be called a seed as well. It's not so much a fire, but a seed, and then the plant that's going to grow from one seed is not a plant that's going to grow from the other seed at all. And the fruits that one's going to bear is not the same that the other ones will. But yeah, so I think that's my definition of the fire, of what that is.
Do you think it's possible, or is it possible to practice Solomonic magic or grimoiric magic without going through this experience? Do you think that, you think of people like Dee and Kelly, and there's all these people that probably did not have something as what you're talking about happen to them, but obviously they're famous historical figures. Do you think it's possible at all, or does it alter or tweak, or is every individual a little bit different in that arena?
Well, Solomonic magic is an initiatory in nature, so yes. I mean, it definitely, and that, I made that clear in the book too, that although I'm mentioning these things, this isn't a book designed for Obeah people to work Solomonic magic at all. I think there's hardly a point for me to be telling them how to do these things unless they have an interest in Solomonic magic in itself. But Solomonic magic is what it is. Like it's a set of formulae to which you follow this procedure and with some caveats to where you are, to who you are, to several environmental considerations to the operation, they will work. And they are not necessarily presided by a spirit that checks whether you're initiating something or not. They're not, sorry, that came out a bit wrong. What I mean is that it's not preconditioned on you having been initiated by a spirit. So even though, and to be honest, I find in this history we can find that he actually prayed a lot and he retreated as well, and he did something, like, to say again that he did what the mythological King Solomon did would be a mistake. I don't actually know that that's exactly what happened, and history is this fickle thing that people write down in books what they want to write. But nevertheless, what is said that he did is he prayed a lot and he purified himself, and he did a lot of that as a preparation for Solomonic magic, which I also in the book say you will have to do if you want to do an evocation properly and you want to do it well. So to answer the question, I don't think anyone needs to be thinking about this in terms of I have Obeah or I should go after that, because it definitely is not precondition on any of this.
What is your personal definition of magic? I know that people like Dr. Skinner and Frater Ashton Chassan, and I'm sure Jake Stratton Kent, like everyone might have a slightly different term of magic. What is magic or ceremonial magic? How do you see that, and how do you define that?
Well, if I define it very different than I define other things, I think that this universe has a very complex ecosystem of entities or creatures even, and this world has, and this intermingles with different worlds, and reality in a nutshell, what I mean is much more complex than we perceive, and I'm pretty sure occultists will agree with that. And I think magic is the means by which we interact with this ecosystem of spirits, and different sets of spirits will have different procedures, and they will have different, a different logic and a different set of protocols to be approached. And I think that's what magic is. Magic is just purely the means by which we go and work with these spirits. And that may or may not mean that change in this world will affect as a consequence of that. I think most of the time that's what most people are going for, and especially with Solomonic magic, all in all, the grimoires have a very practical emphasis on you solving problems, not unlike a lot of other sorceries that we find in the world. And so, yes, that often translates itself into changes being affected here, but nevertheless, I think the magic is in itself the protocols by which we interact with these spirits.
You mentioned in the book that there's a difference between ceremonial operations and some people who might, quote, attempt the same with offerings and requests. Like there might be some people who are like, oh, if I just forget about the circle and the constraining and the binding and the oath, I'm just going to, offer honey and bread and fruit and everything for 10,000 days, and then I'll build a relationship. Can you delineate for the listeners how you see the difference between ceremonial magic and ritual offerings?
Well, I think they're different things. I think ceremonial isn't ceremonial for the sake of being ceremonial. Like I find the ceremonies that you find in Solomonic magic are rites of evocation. That's what they are. And okay, not everything is evocation within Solomonic magic, of course, but the thing we're talking about is, and I think if you look, I'm thinking about Ryan's Jinn sorcery book, which you may have heard about, also published by Scarlet Imprint. You'll find that the rites of evocation there are, in some respects, they're simpler, but in other respects, they're just very demanding too, such as purity, such as retreating to a proper place to conduct the operation and so on. I think in the end, when you say, oh, you can do away with the binding and do away with the circle, you're talking about two very different things. Like the circle itself is a tool. There's a purpose to itself, just the same as there's a purpose to the blade and there's a purpose to the pentacles and so on. All of those are tools to create a certain kind of environment and impress certain things onto the spirits so that they will appear. So that's why you're tooling. You're not tooling to run a ceremony or a pretty one. You're tooling to compel a spirit to appear. That's what you're doing with that. That's probably crucially the difference. I have worked myself in ways that did not entail binding spirits before. And that paragraph is a shorter version of my criticism about equating this nigromancia with Solomonic magic as bona fide Solomonic magic, which is then really binding spirits and controlling them. There's a number of reasons why it's not the same thing. Like in the end, you are actually dealing, at least when it comes to the demons and to the lower spirits, you are really dealing with a hot avenue of spirits of this tradition, So just much in the same way that you have hotter spirits in traditions such as voodoo and so on, and they demand a certain kind of protocol and a certain kind of treatment, and there's a different relationship that people will have with them than you have with the other ones who are not as hot. It's the same thing in Solomonic magic, except that not only you're seeking to work with them, but you're seeking to obtain something from them, which is tricky. It's very difficult. These aren't spirits that are out there to help you. They're not existing to serve us at all. Like they do serve things, and they do serve other spirits. Mostly that's what they do, in fact. And we as magicians, you can exert control over them, and you can ply your way in to actually try and obtain control over them. But attempting the same thing with offerings. For instance, I find first and foremost that you find it's practically impossible to evoke a spirit with offerings. So it's, for one, they're not going to just show up and appear because you lay down a few offerings and you ask really nicely. That's just not going to happen. That's nonsense, because, if that were the case, everyone would be doing that, and anyone would be capable of producing a supernatural effect of the magnitude of an evocation with just a few offerings, which is nonsense. It's crazy, but I'm not saying nothing's happening in those cases. Something may be happening, something probably is happening, but it's definitely not evocation. It definitely isn't you controlling those spirits. And without control, you will get very different outcomes from both things.
And I think you mentioned on Rune Soup that there was a period where you used to feed your spirits, but now you don't, because you operate through Lucifer and work that way. And because of Lucifer, and we're going to get into all of this in terms of the triad and the hierarchies and all of that, but because of Lucifer, you used to feed your spirits, but now there's a way where those spirits are taken care of without being fed anything. Is that right?
No, I used to feed the spirits. I used to do some of that, but it was never quite like that. I think the way that most people say, I feed the spirits, they're doing an emulation of a perceived aspect of traditional, African traditional religions, which is also a nonsensical approach, I think, to these spirits. But what happened is that the approach before was don't control them, try to form pacts with them, see what they say, and try to get them to swear certain oaths to you, but simply based on, good faith. And then actually use higher spirits to actually control them. Those are the difference. The difference between one step and the other is that. The thing is that what I now do is I don't necessarily appease the spirits, the lower spirits of Solomonic magic. Like, I work with them. Some of them are brought in, and not all of them are actually evil or tricksters or anything like that. And in which case, the relationship that develops with them is different, because there may be a matter of mutual interest in which you can help them with. They may have certain relationships with other spirits which you can help them with. And there are things like that. So in those cases, there is an exchange. So it's not to say that you will never ever do something like that, because the spirits, to put a long story short, they are not all the same. Like the catalog involves a number of spirits. Many of them are actually bad and evil and will trick you, and some of them won't. So to say that this is how we treat those spirits is a bit of a generalization. That's not very useful too. There's not an altar in which I kneel in front of and then I cult those spirits. That's not what's happening. Definitely not.
When discussing Obeah, you mentioned that there are some people who might think that by including these traditions and these kind of other magical workings, that it might be, some might consider it another, quote, gratuitous alteration of the Solomonic approach. But for the listeners out there, and what I love that you do in the book is you really explain how this is not a departure from the Solomonic approach. In fact, when you consider the traditional Solomonic approach, the different traditions you draw from actually help refine and clarify the approach. Can you just talk about that a little bit, Giulio?
This mostly relates to tooling than anything, I think, and not so much ritual structure, because the ritual structure of several of the grimoires I'm referring to in my book are not that different, to be honest. They all will advocate for you to apply increasing degrees of pressure on the spirits until they appear, and you can find it sparsely on things, but they are all there. But what I mean is that as far as tooling goes and as far as that particular statement goes, is that the tools have a purpose, like they have a reason for being in the ceremony. So when you make a black-handled knife, you're building an instrument of protection which complements the function of the circle. And that is done because you will perform an invocation. That's not done because if you don't have a knife, the spirits won't appear. But if you will perform an invocation, they will likely take a certain route, so to speak, for lack of a better word, that you may need that protection, because you don't really know who you're going to actually meet. You don't know what's going to happen. You know, the stance the spirit may have against you. You don't know anything about that. So like I said, again, some of them may be friendly, some not. But in respecting the essence of these tools and in respecting the statement behind them, like you can, of course, work within that. Like you can, drawing a circle, for instance, Ars Goetia says, here's the circle design. And if you look at the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, they say, here's a different circle design, which in fact is a much more simple one. And if you look at the one that I use in my book, it's a different one again. And within those variations, we're not looking at a situation where, that circle works, the other one doesn't. What you're looking at is that there's a circle, and the purpose of that circle is protection. And you can work within that to some degree. So I'm trying to advocate perhaps a sensible notion of what matters and what doesn't, and it's a difficult endeavor. This too easily becomes a thing where people then pluck from different grimoires whatever they want, and then they put it together. And arguably, I've done that to a degree too, but I find that when you're conducting experiments and you don't know exactly the purpose of things, you're better off simply doing what the manuscript tells you to, and then going from there. And you certainly will, if you actually do it seriously, you certainly will end up somewhere else, and that's fine. It's just a natural course of things. But you can't start out by assuming that the worth of such and such aspect or tool is this, hence I'm not going to use it, or hence I'm going to, prefer the other approach from the other book there. I mean, look, you can do it, but that's going to be your own route to find out whether it actually works or not, and you will have to be very judicious about what happens and the outcomes. There's no escaping the fact that no matter how you go about this, you will still need to work very hard to try to make the evocations work first and foremost.
What inspired you, Giulio, to finally put quill to parchment, so to speak, and write this book, Magister Officiorum? Was Gordon White harassing you so much that you decided just to do it, or what happened?
He didn't harass me. That's not how I would call it, but
I know,
he was. Yeah. I know. No, he was a quite big driving force behind it for sure. Like a lot of the blog posts that you find, or my journal posts that you find, they were once a book idea, and they were something that I intended on writing. But then again, as you can see from how succinct this volume is, I tend to make things as practical and as short as I can, because most of the time I'm only concerned about telling something that I have been doing for a while. So it's usually after some time has been, happened with that practice, and then now I'm talking about the experience that was had. So it was actually, I think many times since I started practicing Solomonic magic in this format, there has been a tendency of me to simply go, you know what, I'm just going to write an essay and then put it out there. And I think Gordon's incentive was key in convincing me that a bigger elaboration of things would actually be beneficial to it. And I think he was right in the end, but the book began as a pamphlet. The book did not begin as a book. Like it started out as a pamphlet, and I had a conversation with Alkistis from Scarlet Imprint in which, we initially submitted a pamphlet, but then I kept, according to the conversations that I was having with Gordon and thinking about things, and him bringing up things that I told him about my practice over the times. And he says, well, how about that? And in the end, I kept telling this, Chris, I said, look, I could elaborate on that. And they kept going, no, you know what? Like, you're welcome to. Like, we'll support you, we'll read, we'll edit, and so on. And so I think this whole team of people were, in the end, responsible for it becoming a book as opposed to another post that we wouldn't be having a conversation about now here. So yes, and it came out well. I think towards maybe the middle of it, I already was having a sense of, I was writing a book that I wanted to have found when I was young, and a book that I wish I had in my hands. I was already thinking, what would I think if I read this page, and so on. And then I started getting to work more like that.
With Magister Officiorum, you take readers through, Giulio, the Lemegeton's Goetia, this very famous, or one could say infamous, grimoire detailing the procedures to summon a register of 72 spirits. What was it specifically about the Lemegeton's Goetia that made you say, aha, I'm writing a book and this is the grimoire that I'd like to focus on?
Well, I think the format that I relied on was the Goetia. And that format doesn't essentially belong to it. Like, it's earlier, actually, and it comes from the Heptameron. And that, in turn, I have good reasons to believe that it actually comes from a much older and a once widely practiced format of actually evoking spirits and that kind of spirit, which is something for a different time for me to discuss. But I was tangentially perhaps interested in Goetia for many years. Like, I did practice the Key of Solomon before, and actually the Key of Solomon was the reason why I made several of the implements I already had. But the Goetia wasn't something I ever planned on actually getting serious on doing, because I had already worked to a good degree these same spirits using the Key of Solomon approach and some variant of it. But it was really when some of the Obeah spirits came into the equation, and then there was the reference that they pointed to and saying, this is actually it. This is going to be the thing, and this format here is very efficient for working those spirits, because this is how you're going to actually be able to get them to come and to swear an oath in a record in your book, which is the thing. The book being the magical book, not the book that I wrote, to be clear. And so this format, essentially, all in all, what they were saying is this: if you call them in this manner, and if you get them to swear this oath, and this oath goes in a magical book, it will increasingly build up on their powers to a point that then this thing is going to become its own tradition, its own thing, and your thing, of course. And so that's how it happened. Like, the Ars Goetia wasn't something that I deliberated one day as, okay, maybe I should do that instead. No, I wasn't exactly even thinking about doing it. I just, Obeah happened, and then as a consequence of that, this other thing happened.
There's been some discussion online about this, and just to take a quick detour, with the origins of the Heptameron, I know authors like Dr. Stephen Skinner say, if you look at the circle, it's reminiscent of the Greco-Egyptian circle because it specifically includes spirits of the day and the hour. And I'd love to get your opinion on this, because there's others who say you look at the 7 kings and they're reminiscent of the 7 jinn kings in the Arabic tradition. I guess, with someone with your experience, where do you think the origins of the Heptameron are? Because when you look at the Hygromantia, there's not a direct connection, although the Heptameron's been bound to some Hygromantia manuscripts, but where do you think it came from?
Look, I'm no historian and I don't purport to be one, actually, but however, I will say that these conclusions aren't definitive yet. Like, I think we may still find out with a few more decades in front of us of study and uncovering of manuscripts. We may actually get a good answer to that question that you're asking there. And I think, though, that even within Solomonic magic, naturally, because it is magic, it's not religion, like, you have different lineages, so to speak, and methods of approaching them. And you can find, I think you find in the Heptameron, you find in the Ars Goetia, and you find in certain parts of the Book of Spirits within the Book of Oberon, which is the Folger manuscript. You will find commonalities of how these spirits were approached, which is what some people think is the bad approach, which is the call forth and bind them and control them. And there are elements of that in all these books that I just said. There's some of that in the Hygromantia, but again, remember that the Hygromantia isn't, well, it's a collection of manuscripts first and foremost, but the parts that detail evocation don't detail the evocation of a singular spirit. They're an operation for creating an environment for spirits to appear. So a number of them will. And then you are supposed to get their names, and then you're supposed to get them to do things for you. So it's an open-ended operation, much in the same way that several of the key of Solomon manuscripts are. So the Ars Goetia is a different story in that you're conjuring a specific spirit. And again, the same sort of stuff that you will find in the Fulgar manuscript is that. Like, you will find the method for conjuring one spirit. And Heptameron is the same thing. Like, you have the methods for, calling forth one angel. And so there are different ideas which there's a big impact on how things are done and how different these things go. Now, as to where it came from, like, I have reason to believe from my practice, and these aren't things I can corroborate historically, to believe that there has been groups of people doing that in certain places in the world for a long time, and they were more organized than we are now. Like, they were essentially people passing proper secrets in the sense that, okay, I worked such and such and such spirits, and these are their names, these are the sigils, and this is how it was done, and here you go. And then the next person works it, and so on and so forth. So operating really more like lineages. But this is not, again, like I said, something I can point you to a book that will say that in fact happened, but it is a line of questioning that I follow with some spirits, and that is what they said this was. So I'm throwing my hat out there to say that, Spirit said so, but yes.
You praise the structure of the Goetia and the Heptameron as well, having this series of evocations that generate higher and higher pressure. Can you talk about what you mean by, and you touch on this in the book, about generating increasing pressure, and I think other people might call it building magical tension, but what is this, and why is that so important to a successful operation?
I think you have a situation in magic or evocation specifically where a lot of these formulas, including the one that we're talking about here, and I'll try to stick to it, like it starts out nicely, as in, if you look at the first conjuration, it's not at all offensive. Like, you're reminding the spirit of several names that they presumably believe in, and they, well, quite certainly believe in. So these are names that they themselves heed when they hear. So, and they may even in some cases be servants or have served those spirits that you're naming there. So what you're doing is, like, I'm reminding you of so and so and so. You should come here because so and so and so said you should, and so on. And this is the part where it ties in with the rules that I mentioned in the book. Like, obviously, I, as an entrant, don't speak for those angels. I don't speak for God. I don't speak for any of those spirits at all, but I'm saying I do, but I don't. And essentially what you're doing it's not nonsense, because you are exploiting the relationship between the spirit you're calling and those spirits. That's what you're doing. You're inserting yourself in there, staking a claim and seeing what happens. And that is not, on an average case, that's not going to be efficient. Like, you're not going to go there, remind them, and they're going to show up and job done. I mean, look, if that happens to you, excellent. Like, it's an incredibly talented person in a very right environment. So I'm not going to say it's impossible for it to happen, but it's very unlikely, though. So what you do next is you start increasing the pressure in the sense that, I'm getting upset, and now I'm calling you by so and so and so, and then you keep increasing that until the spirit starts hearing you, or they may have even heard the first maybe hour of conjurations in which you recited only the first one. And then if you start reciting the second one, you're actually starting to issue small threats, and by which point the structure of the ritual goes to the king that rules that spirit and says, free up that spirit because I know you control them. And then you issue light threats to the king itself in the sense that, remember that this office that you have was given to you by God, it's held by the angels and so on. So free up that spirit for them to come to me. And that is actually very reflective of how the relationship between these spirits in themselves happens. And it is something that my experience corroborates, in that they themselves perform tasks for those other spirits. So they may well be in a task, but that may really well be the case that, it's happening in the background. And that may be the reason why they're not there appearing to you right now. It's because the other spirit that controls them may not let them do it. And so you start escalating that increasingly until finally you get the apparition. Now, not every evocation will require you to do these things. It really is up to you to figure out how many applications or how many conjurations you will have to do. All in all, what I can say is that it will likely take a long time. Like in the first few times, it was going to take many, many hours of calling them forth until it happens. Like you cannot expect to do an evocation in an hour or even 2 hours or 3 hours for that matter. Like it will take longer than that. So, and it may possibly take several attempts until something works. Now, this isn't a promise I'm making, but it's a likelihood that you have to factor in when you're deciding whether you're interested in doing evocation magic at all or not.
I know when Dr. Skinner was on, and my question is do you find this to be the same thing? He says what evocation is you're pulling an unwilling spirit into the vicinity of the circle. And you're doing this by building magical tension, and if they're not coming on the fourth reciting of the evocation, they're going to come at the fifth. And this has to be your attitude of every time you kind of generate more evocatory gravity, so to speak, where you pull them in. I don't know. I guess, like, does it feel like pulling? Does it feel like generating gravity and the spirits are unwillingly falling in? Or what are the mechanics as you operate with them?
Look, on average, yes, they are unwilling to come. That's a given. Like they may, and even if they do come, they may not appear to you. And there are several issues that this pressure aims to resolve. So I may have addressed that in the book as well. Part of the reason why you're applying all that pressure and you're insisting even beyond the point that you may have a presence in the room and you may actually be able to more or less see it, but you're still applying pressure anyway because you want to see the full operation. And yes, I mean, they are largely unwilling to come, first and foremost, and second, they're very unwilling to appear to you. But the usefulness of doing all that could be equated, and I think somebody else may have used this metaphor recently, but it's like breaking a wild horse. They're very unwilling to serve you in the beginning, and then if you're gallant about it, you will manage to, and then they will serve you, and by which point they are broken, and by which point you don't need to be yelling at it, like you don't need to be doing anything. By the point they're broken and appeared, and they agree to appear, they have already conceded to themselves that you can speak for those forces that you've been talking about all along during the conjurations. So at that point, you can get them to swear an oath, because by the time they have granted that you can and should be respected as a magician. So that's exactly what's going on there. So they're not swearing an oath because they like doing these things. They're swearing an oath because you were sufficiently strong to compel them to appear, by which point they will, sign up and go, okay, we're obeying and we're working together and so on. But look, with all that in mind, that's not a guarantee they won't try to trick you anyway. There's no guarantee that during the relationship or during commands and constraints that you issue to them, they won't try to sneak out or not work in the way that you designated. Like this evocation really is only the beginning of everything. It's not the work itself. Like even if you do all the effort of evoking spirits and you can do this successfully, becoming an efficient magician is really about controlling the spirits to do things you tell them to. And that is a work in itself. So that is something else entirely. That's going to take a lot of ensuring, for one, that they are who they are, that it's going to take ensuring that they fulfill the pact or the agreement, as you said, and then it's going to entail you calling them back to see what happened and so on. So there really is, it's a part-time job in many ways. The work is huge. It's not just evoke and here you go and we're going to shower you with gold. This just doesn't happen in my experience.
In the book, you describe that the Goetia that you operate on uses a structure that is not explicit in the Lemegeton's Goetia. In terms of the Goetia of the Lemegeton talks about the 4 kings and the 72 spirits, but there's no triad above those spirits explicitly mentioned. But then in a really good blog post, you talked about the Book of Oberon and using this triad that was removed or at least was omitted. Can you just share with listeners about the structure a little bit?
Yeah, I think this has a lot to do with a chapter that I wrote about the tree and the work with Lucifer, in which you seek an approach with him first. That connects well with that. Look, catalogs are a tricky thing. Like we have many versions, and I myself have done my own studies about them and what they are. I published a blog post, quite extensive one about that. And it's all well and good, like to acknowledge that we have had different versions of the catalogs, which some of them feature the king or sort of the rulers and the top 3 rulers, and others haven't, and so on. And first and foremost, don't think that the work can be broken simply by the removal of the 3. Like the work still remains effective. Like it's prone to be less effective because you will have less authority to refer to when calling them for it, but it isn't broken by any like it's not fundamentally broken. You can still do it. I have met people who have worked the Ars Goetia as is without the 3 kings, and they have done it well, done it better than me, as a matter of fact, and which proves to me, at least to me conclusively, that this isn't as broken as most people would like to say. Now, cross-sectional studies such as we can find in the Auburn such and such spirits coming before these, that's helpful, but it really depends on how you use them now. So that's a separate part of the story, which is what I'm suggesting in the book is a dream conjuration operation, which comes from Obeah in a way. And it is for you to get cozy, so to speak, with a messenger from Lucifer who can then assert that you will, you can ask them for precisely the treasure of, can you put in a good word for me? And then when I call that name, they will listen. And that's the goal of that operation. So it's for you to ask specifically one thing out of them. And it's an effective thing. I've done, perhaps what I do is different than that because I actually work Obeah itself, but that operation is effective. That operation will mean a lot more than you simply, actually, now that we know there are 3 chiefs, we should just conjure them by the 3 chiefs. That's going to add perhaps a small punch to your operation, but not a lot, to be honest. Like they know who they're ruled by, and you are already telling them, all the angels and all the other spirits that rule over them. So it's not like you adding the triad, now suddenly we're going to appear. That's not how it works. Like you can use that effectively, which is what I think I'm suggesting in the book, and which is better than just using conjuration.
The first time you do an evocation, there's some people who suggest, finding a spirit lower down the chain, so to speak, that can bestow good familiars and then working your way up. But in your book, one of the things that you emphasize is, yes, starting with a treasure-finding spirit, which I'd love for you to explain more about to the listeners, but the purpose of that is to generate a key in which you then can work directly with one of the kings. And it is that relationship with the king that generates a plethora of magical experience. So can you just talk about how you see that whole thing about the best way to get started?
The spirit that I'm indicating in the book is a spirit I have amongst my spirits, and that's the reason why I went into the book. It's because it's a treasure spirit, as you said. And yes, in general, I agree with the principle of starting with lower spirits because for the obvious reason that they're easier to call forth and they're less demanding and less rebellious, so to speak. And not necessarily, but they may be more likely than not. They're going to be easier. But what I'm actually suggesting, as you pointed out, it's not just that. There's a reason why you're conjuring a treasure spirit first. Treasure spirits are a whole category of spirits in themselves. Some of them have access to magical items, which is really items that can compel other bigger spirits into doing things. And the particular spirit I'm naming in the book, Imon, she can get you that. She is the kind of spirit that can get you magical items. She will go and tell you, okay, there's a secret related to this time and these spirits that if you work this magic at this time, then you can manufacture this, say, ring or this fetish. Fetish is not exactly a word I want to use. I'm thinking Obeah here, but this item, so to speak, you're manufacturing this thing, and when you actually display this item as you would display some of the other regalia of the operation, then they will appear to you, and it will be easier, and they may appear to you. They will more likely than not appear to you, not aggressively, and then be conducive to actually be working with you. So that is the purpose of a treasure spirit there. The treasure you're asking is magical. It's not treasure gold. It really is, you're asking for magical treasure. But there's a whole dimension of these magical items which I could probably write a whole book about. And they're very interesting in how they are. Like, they're not like the average talisman that you make. I mean, not to say that they don't work, they do, but if you like the astrological talismans, they work for, say, the sun or whatever. They will, if you do a good election and you can attract that power to you, and they will work. But these magical items I'm talking about, they're very, very powerful. They're very incredible in how they look. They're very different. Like, if you do it right, there's going to be a series of weird and strange events unfolding around it all the time. Like, they will be different. Like, they will be notably, tangibly magical, in a sense that even there's something that I named in the book, which is this constant tendency for you to lose the item. And that's really the thieving spirits may actually attack you for the sake of actually obtaining that. So there's going to be a tendency, perhaps, I mean, to be a bit funny about it, like you're naming something similar to what you see in the tokens in the One Ring, like people suddenly losing a ring because the ring had different plans, right? I mean, yeah, like of course I'm not saying it's the same thing, but what I'm saying is that you have a situation where spirits are interested in that and they want that item from you, and you will lose it. If you're careless, you will lose it. So you're going to have to, along with being given that item, she will, likelihood tell you, you have to keep this item in such and such way, because otherwise you will lose it for sure. So
that is fascinating. And I know that you touched on the magical ring, and I'd like for you to elaborate on that, because I know that there's a lot of information you have on the ring that some of it might be in the book, some of it might not be. But before we get to the ring, Giulio, let's talk about the Liber Spirituum a little bit, which is, as you say, not your actual book, which is Magister Officiorum, but the actual book itself that is specifically to hold the spirit sigil, images, an oath. It might be placed in a spiritus loci, depending on the grimoire. But in your book, when it comes to the construction of the Liber Spirituum, you mention that the book itself does not need any special consecrations before you start operating, that instead it generates its power based on a successive number of evocations and a successive number of operations. So my question is, a lot of grimoires, like the Key of Solomon, for example, have very, very in-depth, like pre-operation steps where for 7 days you're keeping a lamp lit and you're reciting prayers and conjurations and incense. And so are you saying that you don't need any of that from your experience, that might be something that maybe was added later on, but it's not necessary? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I don't know that I'm necessarily speaking about the same sort of thing that other people may have written down in manuscripts, like what this Liber Spirituum I'm talking about. Like, I'm not going to say that it will be bad if you consecrate or something. Like, you can probably get creative with things, and I don't think it would detract from it in any way. Perhaps it might even work better than I did. But what I was being clear about is that I would be lying if I said that you have to consecrate, because I was never directed to. I was never told that I should consecrate that book at all, so I didn't. But essentially, the only thing I was told is that it needs to be new and not having been used for any other end other than the end that it will be used for. So that is why I said, it really only needs to be new, because that's what I know about it. Now, I'm aware that there are different books in different times in history, and there are stories, which some of them I mentioned in the book as well, about that sort of magical book appearing in places and so on. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm inclined to think it could be similar, but maybe not, because, for instance, you see personal diaries, you often will find just really sigils of spirits and descriptions of what they do, and that is part of what you're going to put in the Liber Spirituum I'm talking about. But it's important that you carry it with you to the evocation, and you write down the time when it happened, and then you write down the oaths that it happened, and you display that to the spirit, saying, like, the spirit will see you doing that, and that thing will become more or less a contract between you and them. So that is the power that you're putting into that book. That's not, I can't speak for what other people thought, but what I'm talking about is that you are accumulating power impacts, and in time you will accumulate a lot of things in it. Like, mine, I think, in the grand scheme of things, is not very old. Like, it's not a 30-year-old book or something. It's newish, but it's very, like, it's getting very fat. Like, it's proper full of things at this point, and they all pertain to operations and secrets and things that were in part, and names as well, and so on. And then there's even the way that names should be read in the order that should be read, and so on. These are all revelations from the spirits, and that's the kind of power that ends up in it. And you are really meant to bring it with you to the evocation, because something that I didn't find necessary to outline in the book, but it's nevertheless true, is that for you to do repeated operations with the same spirit, that's what you're going to use. You're going to actually open the book and recite what you then form with the spirits, as in, if you tell them towards the end of the operation, okay, you will come back to me when I call you, and then they are going to tell you how, and you're going to write it down, and that's the procedure you're going to do. More likely involves opening the book and reading out from it, and then the spirit will appear in a much easier way than it would through evocation. Through the ceremony, the usual format.
That is fascinating. So you keep the book with you inside the circle, and you literally will write in the Liber Spiritum so that the spirits can see that, right? And I ask that because yes. I know some people have said, some people have put the Liber Spiritum in a triangle of the art outside the circle and instruct the spirit itself to give some kind of signature or imprint some kind of sign themselves on the book. But that's not the way you're going about it. That's definitely not
what I'm saying. Look, I find it impressive. I think that sort of approach that these other people are writing about, and I have done that, something similar in the past, it's impressive. If it happens, you're going to spend months looking at it thinking, Jesus, how did this thing happen? It's impressive. There's not the kind of thing where you used to seeing, I don't think. But you don't get it at all. The token is meant to be with you, and it is just an object of power you carry with you, much like the pentacles, much like these other implements that you carry with yourself, and the Ring of Solomon as well, and so on. But that is the record of the pacts, and it is a document that states that I work with so and so spirit, and it is a true record of it, which really makes a difference for them. So in the future, there's going to be operations in which you're going to actually have to call for certain spirits, and you're going to have to say, I have so and 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 so that I have worked with on day so and so and so and so, and so you will have to appear. And these things have to be true when you say, because these other spirits I'm talking about, they're bigger, they're meaner, and they are not out there to believe you. If you say you're King Solomon, they won't believe you at all. So it's important for you to build up these things, and that's how the book becomes an object of power in itself.
Can you talk about the Ring of Solomon, and specifically in your book, and in the way that you conduct your operations and evocations? What are some things that maybe people who might have read the Lemegetons of Goetia, or they're armchair magicians, or they've dabbled in it, but they might not really understand about the Ring? What do you want people to understand about the Ring?
The Ring is not a token. It's a big one, and it is a meaningful one because it names Michael, at least as it is in the Ars Goetia, and Michael is a very important name as far as they're concerned, because that archangel is the one behind the subjugation of these spirits. Michael is behind the Solomonic tradition entirely. So he's the one that appears to King Solomon, and everything happens on account of that. So Michael is a very important name, and he's not the only name in the Ring, of course, but the Ring is a token. I didn't put it in the book. I didn't emphasize it as much in the book because it's just simply not necessary for you to follow the particular path I'm talking about there. I'm not saying that the Ring isn't necessary for you to work Solomonic magic in general. In all likelihood, you will find yourself making the Ring later. But for the spirits and for the particular route that I'm suggesting there, I'm confident that you don't need it, and you're welcome to postpone that if you want. So in the interest of writing a report which people can follow, as opposed to be vague about how important that thing is, I decided to omit so as to not get people tangled with the idea that, I should have a ring, that's why it didn't work. No, it isn't why it didn't work. I can assure you that if it hasn't worked to the evocation of that spirit, it's not because you don't have a ring. It may be for a number of reasons, but that's not why. But I've read stories, including John King's account, in which he mentions that the spirits would place powers that he requested in the ring. So that's interesting. I haven't worked in that way myself, and I can't speak for it. But, on the other hand, the Ring of Solomon actually is more used in my Obeah practice than it is used in Solomonic magic these days.
You touch on this as well in the book, and I think a lot of people who are making the transition from armchair magician to actual practicing magician freak out about this, which is they think that every single detail in constructing a tool will make or break the ritual. So here's an example that I have heard before. The Liber Spiritum, right? There are things that some of the instructions say this needs to be either virgin parchment or pure vellum. It needs to be calfskin. And there are people freaking out going, I can't construct a Liber Spirituum because I cannot find virgin, calfskin, and I can't find this. I'm stuck. I can't go on because why even do the operation if I don't have the exact kind of parchment? So I guess my question would be, does every tool make or break the operation? And how did you navigate that? Like, how did you figure out, well, the grimoire says this, but do I have to follow that exactly? Because some people are very by the book, so to speak. So how did you figure that out?
Well, look, I'm very by the book, so to speak, actually. And I have in the past worked the other books by the book too. So I find, look, as a matter of principle, if you're going to conduct a difficult experiment, you can't bring in what you think is knowledge, because it isn't. Like, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's not knowledge. It's a guess that you have, and the guess may not be working in your favor at all. So I think even if you were to ignore my book entirely and you decided that you're going to work the Hygromantia today, the best thing you can do is really just do exactly what it said there and remove from your mind any expectations that you will be able to find these things in the course of a month, because it may really take a much longer time for you to acquire everything. And that's fine, because it's doubtful that you're going to have, I mean, look, maybe you're a resource individual and you have skills, or both, or just one of them. So be it. But in any case, maybe you will be able to find them quickly, in which case it's good for you. But I think the average person shouldn't expect to be able to make a black-handled knife from one day to the next. And I also don't think they should think that the kitchen knife is the same thing, because it isn't. Like, there's a specific enchantment that you are placing in the blade by making it that way that makes it powerful for the end that it's doing, right? Otherwise, it will not be. So otherwise, you're really just bringing something else to it. So, but what I'm trying to say about the makes or breaks thing, if you look at the Ars Goetia, they don't say anything about a black-handled knife. It doesn't have that. Like, it has a sword, or they make mentions of that. So what I'm trying to say is that try to find a good measure of understanding the purpose of tools and really understanding and committing yourself to crafting tools that fulfill the purpose they're, intended to. Find a measure of that in what you're reading about. That may be difficult to do. Like, I don't think there's an easy way to, cut a long story short in that particular question that you ask. I don't think there's an easy way to navigate. You're going to have to do just a lot of it, and you're going to have to do a lot of burning of fingers until you find out where you need to use a glove or not. But all in all, having said what I said in the book, I still think that if you will conduct this kind of experiment, you owe to yourself to not betray it by thinking that you know what that's for, and then just going, I can just use that other knife over there because some important figure had it and they considered it to be magical. Like, you have no idea what happened. And that knife may be entirely unsuited for the purpose of a black-handled knife. So, it's not the same thing. You may as well take the year then to find everything you need, if need be, and then only work Evocation by the time you're done with that. Hopefully it's going to take you less than that, but it may as well take a long time. And in the meantime, it's going to actually help you decide whether you are interested in this magic at all. Because believe me, after you're done finding the implements, that is not the hardest part. Like, that is definitely not. You're going to start doing the evocations, and you'll see what I mean. Like, there's going to be a lot of problems. There's going to be a lot of things that you think, oh, this is actually progress. And then you're going to look back in a month and go, that was so not progress. That was, there was something else that was happening. Like, you're going to have to figure it out. And that is actually the difficult part. So if people are struggling with tools and people are going, oh, I can't make a black-handled knife, then look, there's other magic in the world. Go do something else. There are things you may find more palatable and things you may be willing to do, which are, valid pathways, and they're very powerful too. So it may be that just your heart isn't in it, and you're trying to, you're impressed by the spirits and you're impressed by the stories, but you're not really willing to do it. So
that is fascinating, and it goes to a point that you make in the book that's been discussed a lot recently in some forums about, and I'll just quote you in the book. You say, quote, "If done correctly," and you're talking about evocation here, "if done correctly, it will produce an appearance. If not, then something has interfered with it."
Yes.
rather than limiting, you say this is in fact quite liberating in that it enables a relationship with the work that is solid and well understood, and thus to a fair extent predictable and productive. And why is it so important to maintain that fidelity to, you either get an appearance or there's no appearance and you need to recalibrate? Why is that so important?
That has everything to do with the point we were discussing earlier about breaking the spirit. Like, you need to be capable of doing that kind of thing to control them effectively. So if you don't get them to appear, you're not breaking them effectively. That's what's happening. Like, these spirits, and to the best of my knowledge, or to the ones that I have worked with in the catalogs, they all have not all spirits have the power to appear to people. Like, that's just a fact. But these spirits do have this power, and if they don't, it's because they don't want to, or you haven't sufficiently compelled them to do so. So what you're doing with the appearance is you are essentially breaking them to the point that they can then, that it will make sense for them to swear an oath to you, because you are powerful enough for that kind of thing, and you are determined enough for that kind of thing, which is also very important. So you, there's something that in the Folger manuscript, which I quoted at length, in which they indicate that, you should conduct the operation, and if the spirits don't appear, go to sleep and come back 6 hours later and then do more of it. And the point that I can see a resonance between this recommendation and what I'm saying here now, in that you can't call the work done until you manage to break them. That's not an effective way to work with them. Now, is there a nuance to that sort of thing? Yes, there is. Like, there's the pre-appearance stages. They are already effectively there in front of you. You're not seeing them, and unless you're a very good scryer, of course, but they will be there. And to an extent, you could try and work things that way, but it's just very inefficient. Like, you don't know what's going on. You may be getting the wrong spirit. Like, there have been instances that spirits appeared, and then I tested them. They couldn't actually tell me anything. There was, I asked them questions about, what about so-and-so? They didn't know the answer to any of these things. And then I just went, ended the operation and tried again at a different date. And then I actually got the spirit that I was trying to, and then they knew the answer to those things. So what happens is that, essentially, if you get this is very complicated to nail and very gnarly to figure out. So with an apparition and with that degree of contact, you can figure this out. Without that degree of contact, you're operating blind with these spirits that you don't know who they are. And you may well not be able to get much out of them. Like, maybe some things will happen for sure, maybe, but this isn't control at all.
Before someone decides to step into the circle, do you recommend, as a magician, doing things before that in terms of building a relationship, like in your blog post about building a magical routine where every day you're engaging in certain rituals? I mean, I guess, are there things that are prerequisite to that you would recommend if someone's listening and they really like your book, but they don't really know if they should just jump right in? Is there anything you'd recommend that they should do?
Look, that post is old in the grand scheme of things. Like, that post was written when I was still doing a different thing to what I wrote in the book. And that's something that I noticed, the surge in popularity of that post, which in recent times. And I nearly wrote a second one to say, look, this is good, but now, this is good, but this is not the other thing. But anyway, since we're here now, I may as well clarify that. You're welcome to do these routines, and they will tell you a lot of things. If you really do them, if you really follow them strictly, if you really every day work on something, and you're judicious about what's going on, and you write things down and so on, you will discover there are things in there for sure. But that isn't a requisite for you to do Solomonic magic. That will change you. That will put you in different places. They may help that certainly may be conducive for you to, align yourself with certain forces that will ease your transition into, it's a gamble to say, for me to say, yes, definitely do it. That would be that's not necessarily true. So Solomonic magic obeys certain protocols of purity, and the protocols of purity that I wrote down in the book, those are the ones that I have been told that are very important. Those are, purity is very important for you to work these spirits, and I agree with other authors who have said the same thing. But I wouldn't say that you need to be doing those, that kind of routine for a year and before you jump in Solomonic magic. That's not true. Like you're welcome to start today, and then it will be its own thing to figure out. But you're also welcome to do the kind of routine and then see what happens. But again, there is no promise that, one thing will connect with the other necessarily, may not.
And that's exactly why I wanted to ask the question, because I know that there are people out there who might think, I can't step into a circle until I spend 6 months, invoking and doing daily invocations of the 7 planetary arcane. There's people who might be thinking about certain things. So I certainly appreciate the clarification, which is really important. Two, as well, you mentioned scrying, and you say if you're fortunate to work with a scryer, and you've touched on this, that you should absolutely take advantage of the opportunity. Have you not only worked with a scryer, but is working with a scryer something that in your current work, do you actively seek out, or do you have someone that you work with, or you yourself gifted in that area? Or?
Well, I figured it out, I like to think, and I can scribe, but it's not something compulsory. Like, it's not compulsory for what you're doing. Like, in the end, what you're trying to do is get the spirits to appear to you. And by that, I mean, get them to appear to the naked eye. Like, it's not to a scryer. I mean, if you like, that's what I mean. I debated whether I was going to put that in the book or not. And I found it valuable because scryers do exist and people do have that ability. It's rare. It's very, very rare that they will, one, have the ability, and second, the honesty to work well, with that kind of thing. I think we can hear that kind of conundrum, read about this kind of conundrum even in these work in which Kelly changed his story a few times and so on. So, I mean, you see that kind of thing is prone to happening. And I'm pretty sure whoever has worked with scryers before and has had to work with many can attest that it's not, straightforward. But the idea there is in pointing out that if you can get someone to, mediate that for you, who is honest and who has the skill, then by all means do it. But nevertheless, what you are doing here is breaking the spirits until they appear. And when they appear, it doesn't matter if you scry or not. Like, you will see them anyway. So
there are some people who read about the Solomonic 9-day purification, for example, and, fasting, prayer, deep meditative trance states, communing with the divine, all of that stuff. And then there's other people who say, well, I've heard people bring in arguments with Chinese Taoist alchemy, and sexual, not having sex or, for 9 days can help build up some kind of, yang resonance with the spirits, and the spirits can recognize the purity. And then there's people like Dr. Skinner who don't really even touch on purity, but they say, look, in the Egyptian temples, the reason why they forbade you to eat fish and garlic and all this stuff was because of the smell. And spirits have a very sensitive sense of smell, and it's not really touched on in purity. So I guess my question is for you, Giulio, with your experience, when it comes to abstaining and fasting and prayer, is it a practical physical result that you're going after? Is it a physical and a spiritual result? What's really going on here?
I think one food for thought is that anyone who's been inside a temple in the summer can tell you that the smell's not going to be good, whether you eat fish or not. So, there's something to consider there, that I doubt that these people from a time when you had no toilet paper or deodorant were anyway, smelling fantastic. Though then again, they had baths and that kind of thing and other preparations, so some caveat there. But I don't think, in my experience, it doesn't relate to smell or anything. It really is just that purification just makes you holier, really. It contributes to the fact that you're making a talisman out of yourself by being pure. And then when you get in there and you start conjuring those names, you are seen as better by them. That's all that happens, I think. I don't know if this takes much more elaboration than this, to be honest, because you figure it out. Like when you're fasted and pure, it's not that you're getting in a trance at all, because it takes zero trance for you to see the spirits. It has nothing to do with that. It really is you getting your body in I'll borrow the word and say talismanic state of purity, in which that has a reflection in your spiritual to a degree, which when you then recite the conjurations, everything contributes to you being, seen as that being of power.
Okay. And does that tie into, and you touched on this earlier, but we can flesh this out more, a word that other people have used, this ruse, that magic in many ways is a ruse, and yet it's not a ruse. Like, obviously, you and I sitting here right now, we don't have the power to, confine ye spirits into the bottomless pit for all eternity until the flames leap up, even though that might be said. But yet, is it that the spirits, when they engage with someone who has gone through the purity requirements and is donning the appropriate garb and the appropriate implements, is it that the spirits, they look at all that and they basically can't be sure if you're not King Solomon or if you are, and so they kind of are like, I better listen to this, I better at least give this person in the circle some attention here because they might have the ability to really affect me. Can you just talk about this whole concept?
Look, there's an element of everything in that equation. I think that you thinking about the ruses. I think the best way to think about it is that the only ruse really is that before you actually do any evocation, you're not that special to them at all. You're not, okay, maybe some people are, and by virtue of other things, by virtue of some spiritual heritage, by virtue of, I don't know, plans that they may have for you, there are nuances to all this, but in principle, what it means is that you're not special, like you're not given favor by these angels, by God, by the demons, by no one. You're not. So the only ruse is you portraying yourself as a capable person, a person who is capable of issuing threats. You can issue threats, but you can't fulfill them. And as you just said about the, casting you in a pit of fire and so on, but it's entirely not a ruse that the spirits believe in the spirits you're naming at them. So it's a somewhat state of, we can hear those names, we have heard those names many times before, and we have been called by those names before. So other magicians who were holy people really, and have called us by those names before, and we acknowledge those names and we acknowledge that as something we need to heed, and So that's the heritage. I think throughout history, yes, magic has changed, but it has changed for many reasons, but it has also changed because as actual powerful people, as actual avatars of magic start sealing pacts in names of so and so, they build pathways of power between us and these spirits that we can follow. So even the myth of King Solomon, obviously, like he may not have been a real person, but that tells us of people who have bound those spirits by those names before. So we're essentially using the same roads that they have trodden before and exploiting and exploring the same pacts that they have used and taking benefit of that. So in a way, we're building up on top of it. But I think the better metaphor is we're walking the same road, which the spirits themselves acknowledge as valid. So that's what you're doing there. And again, purity, and you said garb yourself and so on, that kind of thing. You're essentially abiding by protocols that other people have, and through which they have established successful relationships and have bound these spirits before. So
before you have a relationship with one of these spirits, you have to go through the entire full ceremony. You need to do everything according to the book. You need to really take your time with it. As you said, you could spend hours in the circle. But you mentioned, afterwards, that there might be an opportunity where you say, come back again when you are called, but that it might be easier, quote unquote, the next time, or once you develop that relationship. I guess my question is for you, with the spirits that you're really familiar with, do you find that you have to go through an entire full ceremony to the full extent when you first did it, or how does that work for you?
The work I do nowadays barely resembles what I wrote about, because the magic has taken a different route. Like, it has transformed itself on the back of the relationships and the pacts that I established and the dominion over certain spirits. So now the way they're called it's different. Like, I think in the epilogue of the book as well, you're going to read a short story about one spirit that is more like it. And even that is not entirely it anymore. So, but it began the way that I wrote down in the book for sure. And, I think everyone should expect that the things will change, especially with the giving of the treasure by Gemon that will already be the first change that will happen to you. Like when that is given to you, then you're going to start using that, and it's anyone's, like, it could be anything that she will give to you. And with that, in all likelihood, there will come changes to the procedure, which you will then append or perhaps replace, and that will then become the means by which you call them. Now, yes, if once you control them, they will obviously come to you more easily than before. I don't repeat a full operation for spirits that I have worked with in the past, but I do perform a full operation, not as the book, but a different thing, for spirits that I don't have any contact with. Just
to expand upon a point that you made when it comes to the key that the treasure-finding spirit will give to the operators if it's successful to work with a king. Can you talk about, Giulio, you mentioned that the key could be a fetish, it could be an item, but it could also be like a verbal recitation or some kind, like it's not just a physical object, is it? Or it doesn't have to be?
No, it doesn't have to be at all. Like there have been other spirits in which, trying to explore certain avenues with them, they have given me conjurations. And I mean, they're not conjurations so much as they are really just strings of names. So they're similar to what you find in Barbara's names in some other manuscripts. But with that often comes, look, you're going to have to say these words at this time of that day, and then you're going to have another opportunity in X number of days, and another one in the next number of months, and so on and so forth. This resembles astrology, but it's not just that. Like, it really is, you're dealing now with the comings and goings of these spirits, and they know where certain spirits will be, and that they will be listening at that time. It's a bit of simplification about what's going to happen, but yes, that those words that I'm talking about will really just be a series of names that you will recite at a specific time that will make it a lot easier for you to do that in the intended goal. That will happen a lot, to be honest. Like, once you start delving into the inner circles of this magic, you're going to start understanding more and more about where these spirits go, who they are, and what they're doing in the world. And then you're going to start realizing that you are becoming an agent with this entire, these plans and these things that are happening. You're starting to meddle in it, and which is something I briefly touched about in the book as well. There's a danger associated with that, because once you see them, they see you, and that creates problems for you. You're going to have to be a very good magician to understand the forces affecting you from that point on too. So, and that may not be pleasant. That may not be actually a good thing at all. So,
wow.
Yeah.
There tends to be two among many different ways to work with the spirits, and one is what you delineate in the book and in the Lemegeton, which is working with a king and the order of hierarchy and invoking the higher spirits to, help bring the lower spirits before the circle to be bound for an oath. And the other is, oddly enough, touched on in the Heptameron, which is the thwarting angels, so to speak, which is, instead of calling a king, like the Heptameron has no mention of a king aside from God, Adonai,
yeah.
but the Lemegeton does, but the Heptameron does have the 7 planetary archangels used almost in kind of a thwarting manner. So I guess obviously your book specifically uses a very effective method of working with a king and the order of hierarchy. What are your thoughts in general on, Giulio, like thwarting angels and that kind of approach to get, or not even angels, but just spirits that are used to counteract or bind, work with other spirits to get them to do things? Is that valid, or?
Well, look, that's always the case. Like, even if you use the king's approach that I'm talking about, that is, what you're working on is, you're working on the relationship that you are assuming they have with one another. So I'm attesting that Gemon has a relationship with Paimon in my book. That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying this is a valid avenue, which if you explore it, it will happen. But nevertheless, you're still pushing the names of angels and God onto the king and onto Gemon directly. So you're still doing all of the aforementioned. You're not just calling the king onto Gemon full stop. But look, there are many king spirits. Like, these aren't, there's not exactly a fixed tree of hierarchy that if you figure out it's going to be like, the best magic in the world. That's not going to happen. Like, the spirits organize themselves in groups. These groups have rulers, and they have at times a relationship with other groups, and in which case you can exploit that. You can announce that you're calling by so-and-so, and then you can try and exploit that friction that may exist between them. But make no mistake, like the four kings that I'm naming there are by far not the only kings. Like there are many other kings. There are more than four kings easily, and there's probably I don't know how many, but there's easily many more than four. And I don't think the Ars Goetia is wrong in naming that you have several kings in the mix, because that has been my experience as well. You're going to have spirits like Baal, that he is a solar king that is incredibly powerful, like more powerful than many of these other king spirits that we're talking about. And if you work them, you understand what I mean. But so this isn't exactly a perfectly geometric organization of spirits. Like by far, it's not. Like you have spirits with different levels, degrees of power, which essentially more often than not translates into, legions they control and so on, but it's not just that. But it's also dependent on, I think it's part of that is their makeup. So some of these kings really have specific functions. They obey angels, and they do things that angels tell them to in the world. So all the time they may be somewhere doing something. And they are essentially the weapons that some of these angels use for conducting things on Earth, and they in turn control other spirits. So that's more or less the logic behind hierarchy. Like there are relationships they hold between themselves, and you're more or less starting out with a certain understanding that I can assure you will not be correct in the long run. You will start discovering these relationships, and you're going to start working on realities that you have been told are real, and then that's going to become your own hierarchy. They may at times really appear to be the same as the things you're reading in books, and I am aware that there have been transcriptions of manuscripts that just bastardized or injected changes that, for seemingly no reason whatsoever. That of course happens, but nevertheless, I'm convinced that other changes that have happened to a hierarchy may really just have been people figuring out something different and writing it down in that way, and which is entirely valid. Like you will find out that happens.
You mentioned in the book that there's also an incredible amount of confidence that comes with the shift in consciousness, the elevation of consciousness when you complete your first successful evocation. And you talk about how important that is. But when you go through that first experience, your first evocation, and all of a sudden you experience that first consciousness shift, and you're like, there is an incredible hierarchy, there's these incredible multidimensional layering, all that stuff. Can you talk about or share a little bit about your first experience? Like, when did you go through that consciousness shift? Was it during an evocation? And did you say, like, holy crap, I can't believe this? Or when did you go through that shift?
Look, I think a spiritual reality was impressed upon me when I was very young. I knew they were there. Not just by knowing, but actually there were earlier experiences that made it happen, and then which led me to places such as Spiritist temples and whatnot, and other houses and so on. So that reality was there. But what I'm trying to say is that evocation really is a different ball game. Like once you can do it, and once you know you can do it for a fact, like I think there's a different, like I'm speaking for myself there about what I wrote in the book, but I think most people will find that you discover a certain realness to everything that changes you. From that point on, there's a lot of things about this world that become very not obvious, but they become like you see them with different eyes, because you understand now that there are these forces sitting here doing many, many, many things upon this world. Like many things that happen are actually directly related to them. And you're going to have that understanding being made clear to you. And also, on a personal level, you will find that you can do evocation magic from that point on. So there's a mission ahead, of course. Like, that doesn't make you instantly powerful. Like I said before, you will have to figure many things out. But you have discovered a vocation, really, that you have for doing that kind of thing. And that will lay a path ahead that's going to make a very different person, I'm pretty sure. The first invocation was impactful, yes. It was very... Like, it dazzled me for months, I think. Like, it was just, like, I couldn't, like, it was very scary in a sense that, like, the spirit was sweet, but it was nevertheless like it wasn't easy because it was so strange, and it moved in such weird ways, and I wasn't used to the fact that they created several illusions on you as they're just present. They're showing you so many things, and it's just like it's confusing in a way, and it's very overwhelming in that same way. Like there have been meets with king spirits that were like, I think there's one parallel that I found very interesting if you watch that film called The Ritual, by the way, where it's a very good film where there's this giant, which is a god in a way for the Norse. And as the giant approached him, he started seeing, like, he would look to one direction, like he was seeing like the shop in which one of his friends died, and like the reality just changed around you. Like the whole thing became different, and that kind of experience I had that before many times, and I think that stays with you. Like you will never see anything the same once that happens.
One of the issues that's talked about, too, is memorization of the conjurations themselves. And some people say, look, you can just read from the book, and other people say it's good to have this stuff memorized because of flow, and you don't want to be fumbling around in dim candlelight trying to read something. Someone at your level, do you use a book every time, like, say, like the Lemegeton's Goetia, or do you kind of develop this flow where maybe you don't go exactly off, or, you didn't go exactly off of what's in the book? Can you just share a little bit about that?
I was the one who said actually that you don't want to find yourself with a blunder of not being able to read from your own book when you are in the magical circle. So you're going to have to actually check when you're preparing the environment that you have sufficient light to actually see what's written there and so on. So as I also said in the book, the first step of the Liber Spiritum will be for you to write the conjurations on them. So you're going to have to do that as a first step. That will bootstrap, so to speak, the book, and then you will make a point of reading off of it. So it's not, you can even have the conjurations memorized, and I do, but it doesn't matter. Like you will still look at it and you will still read from it. And that is a magical process in itself that you will do. So I wouldn't really worry about memorizing conjurations. It's a small psychologization of the whole thing to say that, if you memorize, it's better. But look, there's not like this, that doesn't matter. Like, but the spirits will hear something that you read and something that you said just the same. Now, of course, like if you mechanically read something out of and you fail to put on a good impression or say fiercely, then that will be less effective. But the problem is really that, you're just not doing a good performance, so to speak. Like, but you can do a good performance from reading from things, of course. Like if you rehearse for 15 minutes, the operations, the conjurations, you will be fine. Like most people will just, okay, I got it. And you will then there won't be angles in the text, in the words that you couldn't foresee. Like you will know it, and then you will just go through it. So, yes.
And that goes to the question of something you write, Giulio, in the book on the use of, like, bottling spirits is a section that you have in the book. And I think this would be a good time to talk about the use of a spiritus loci, because, as you know, in the Lemegeton, there is a floor triangle that is prescribed. Some people we're thinking of Dr. Rudd here, obviously, the brass vessel and constructing a brass vessel. For other people, it's putting, I think it's Dr. Skinner talking about this, using a crystal on a table of art inside the circle. So it's not even outside the circle, but for someone like you, when it comes to spiritus loci, how do you tend to focus the spirit?
Well, the bottle doesn't have the same purpose as the circle. Like the bottle is really me reporting on an operation that I have used many times. So I think if you do the main evocation and you actually attest that you can do evocation and you actually start controlling certain spirits, a lot of things are going to become easier by extension. So the bottle operation is one that once you have a few operations under your belt, you will find it a lot easier to do. And the usefulness of that is you being able to move spirits, which is part of something that I mentioned in the book about being a mover of spirits. Like you can command them to places, and you can start using the spirits with whom you have an alliance with to compel these other minor spirits that you may find in nature, you may find in haunted places and so on, and you start becoming an actual agent of moving spirits and constraining them and binding them and controlling them and so on. I mean, which is not to say every time it's going to work superb, because who knows what's there, right? That's not a guarantee that you will be, a superhero, but it will be much more effective for sure when you start controlling certain spirits and they have told you what you have to do. So that operation is, it comes from the Hygromantia, because they outline that as an exorcism, which I believe it can be done, but the usefulness of that is really you bottling spirits to control them later. So it can be used for you to get spirits from somewhere and bring them to you. So if you can work and you start developing, say, a place where you're actually going to keep your spirits and vessels and so on, you can then use that for that. And you can use the bottle perhaps for evocation to answer the question, but it's not exactly how I have worked them. About the triangle, it's effective. It's very interesting. It's definitely a potent form of focusing where the spirit should appear. I subscribe to all that thinking, and I do think it makes sense. And I have seen the triangle being used by some Trinidad and Obeah people as well for different kinds of works. That really happens. So I think there's been a dismissal of the triangle and the circle in this revival, which I think it just misses the point, that it is potent and it works.
Can you just share with our listeners, how do you select the proper location for an operation? And I know that you touched that the actual spirits in the area make a difference. What are the elements that make up a good, ideal location for an operation?
Probably being an undisturbed place is the first thing you want to find. Obviously, by people, you want to find a place where you're not going to be, busted doing an operation like that. But nevertheless, I think it's very hard. In the end, it's probably the one thing that's going to trip most people up. It's the fact that they will, even if you can make a dagger or whatnot, finding a place where you can repeatedly come to perform the first few operations is going to be difficult. So you're going to have a commitment. I have actually spoken to people who told me I'm renting a house for that. And that's not a bad idea. Of course, the house in itself is going to have certain implications to the process, and they will have to figure it out. And it's for that reason that I mentioned the readings of the Psalm 51 and purification of the space, because you're going to have to do that kind of thing. Tends to either soothe angry spirits, or it tends to just silence them. And then there's another possible angle into just explaining that psalm properly, because it's very big and it's a very powerful, it's a very meaningful one. It has appeared in many magical traditions before, and it has been used a lot. And there's much to be said about it, but for the purposes at hand, I would say that you can use it for chilling a place down where you can then conduct this kind of operation. So, but then again, that said, Crossroads, which is one thing I named, Crossroads appear as a recommendation in certain manuscripts of the Hygromantia. Not all of them, by the way, but in some of them it does. Crossroads tend to be very noisy, and it tends to be very problematic and very difficult to nail. You end up, there's often so many spirits with so many things happening in it, that you don't have a good chance to getting right as a newbie, trying to soothe the crossroads to then do an evocation on it. It's very, very, very difficult. So look, it's up to people to do whatever they want, but I personally don't recommend you trying to put yourself in the hardest possible situation to then try to break it, because you will be hard. But I find that, if you find a room that you can secure and avoid people entering it altogether, that's quite essential, in fact, and you can make sure they will be undisturbed, and the only thing going in that room is you to recite the Psalms and to purify, then you'll be fine. That is likely to work, but again, it may take more than that. It may take a while for you to really, understand what's going on. But look, you have to start somewhere. I don't think anyone can write perfect instructions that are going to work everywhere. There are no guarantees with anything about this work. So, something too that's been discussed, and you touch on this in the book, but talking about the black-hilted knife and tracing the circle. Can you just talk about why it's important to trace the boundary of the circle with an iron instrument like the black-hilted knife, or even a consecrated
sword. And I bring that up because I know in previous talks I've had with other people, and I just want to see how it works with you, is that sharpness that spirits can sense, and they don't want to cross something like that. I mean, can you, like, what is the value, or is that valid in your opinion?
Well, I'm not sure it has anything to do with the sharpness. I can't say yes or no about that. Like, I don't know. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. Like, there's some folklore that's associated with, tracing limits with blades, and then spirits can cross. Like, you have that in Brazil, and you have that in Europe. So the two, and you have that, I think, I've seen people in Asian cults and sorceries doing the same thing too. Can't name specific things because I can't remember for sure. But so what I mean to say is, yes, there seems to be a thing to it, but in this instance that I'm talking about, like the blade isn't just iron. Like, the blade is bad iron, which is iron that was used to, kill someone. And that is a powerful taint that you can add to a blade, but it's a taint that's very favorable to Mars. And Mars is a planet that can subjugate many, like, it's a god, so to speak, but it's a god that can subjugate many other gods, and he has the fiery nature of it, plus the enchantment can really be effective in impressing and enchanting the circle in a manner that they will not cross. So, and it's not just that as well. Like, I do hint at the possibility that you can attack spirits by actually perforating the sigil, the parchment sigil, with a blade. That's actually true. You can do that, and it will work if you want to punish them for any reason. But all that hinges on the fact that the instrument has been consecrated to Mars, and it is effective to that end. Like, so as for any other blade doing the same thing, I don't know. Like, it hasn't been my experience. Like, I had a few knives before in my life, and the knife I made and the one that I use, the one that's illustrated in the book, that one is the one that I will keep for the rest of my life. So, and that one works because it has been made in that way.
When you talk about the knife, ideally, if the blade was used in some sense to bring about death, and by some sense I suppose I just mean death, Alex, not just some sense.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because I think a lot of people might say, well, where am I going to find a blade like that in 2018 in New York or something? But then you bring up, like, looking at formerly used military equipment and other things. Can you just talk about how can people do that when it comes to the blade?
Look, that wasn't my idea. That's Gordon's idea, and it's very ingenious, I think, of him to think of that. I hadn't actually thought of it. Like, I sourced mine through different means, which for obvious reasons I can't elaborate, but but that is an ingenious way to procure such a thing. Like, it's going to obviously come with risks because you don't know what actually taints the blade is being used to deliver a death blow. So it's not going to be enough that it hurts someone. It's not going to be enough if you use that to prepare meat. It's not going to be enough for any of that. Like, you will have to be done in that manner. Now, yes, it is hard. And I don't think there's no way around that. Like, I don't think you will find that there's a way around that. I think the only way that you may actually work out is, I'm mentioning that in the first ritual, you could probably try and be slack about it and see what happens but 100% because Gemon is a spirit that's not prone to attacking you at all. And then you can try and work in that from that point and on. So that will actually be constructive, and I think it could work. But ultimately, people have to put it in their heads that this stuff is not easy at all. Like, and there's no way around. Like, it's the same as if you're reading Raim's book about jinns and some of the fasts, which are not entirely fasting, but they're more like purification process in which you eat a reduced diet. But like, you do these things for 13 days, you do these things for 20 something days, you retreat to a cave for a week. Evocation isn't easy. Like, you will not be able to do evocation with kitchen implements. Like, you may be able to do other magic. Like, you probably will be able to do other magic with it. But this ball game here that we're talking about, this is a different story. Like, if you want to do this, and I keep telling people that believe me, there's many other kinds of magic in the world which you may find more appealing. And asking for things that you're willing to do. that you should, in which case, if this doesn't interest you, if you're going to negotiate your way with the tools, and the tools aren't the hardest part of it, you will not be in for a good time. Like, you will not be productive. Like, you will probably waste a lot of time and money with things they will not do in the end. So, it's just the truth. I can't speak for my experience and having been that I just got any blade and now, hey, it worked. Like, no, it hasn't. Like, I've done work with other blades before and the work was fickle. Things happen, and my experience probably are a matter for a larger book in which I can talk more about that. But in principle, I can say to you that a blade that hasn't delivered a death blow will not fulfill the end that I'm talking about there. But you're welcome to try without it if you want.
I think you mentioned this. It was a podcast with you, Gordon, and I think you were on with, was it Al Cummings, I think?
Correct, yes.
And you were like, I don't think people realize that Solomonic magic is batshit crazy. How is Solomonic magic crazy?
Look, I think people have no idea what they're talking about when they say that Solomonic is the well-behaved alleyway of things. Like, it isn't. Like, I think even historically speaking, like, you have religion and you have the formalized priest rites for doing things, and magic is the thing that was always at the fringes. Like, there was never a point that I know of that Solomonic magic was a thing done in an organized temple and in front of society, you know. So at any given point in time that you're talking about calling forth angels to constrain demons or calling forth angels to get them to do things for you and whatnot, at any given time that you're talking about that, you're not talking about anything remotely acceptable by most people. Like, it was always a thing of the fringes. But the crazy aspect that I was referring to at that time is what Solomonic magic proposes is that you are controlling spirits, and some of them actually belong to other traditions. Like, that's entirely what's going on. If you look at the Hygromantia, there's one spirit which is a fairy, a king fairy, or queen fairy, I can't remember now, but a fairy that lives in the mountains, and that belongs to a Greek myth that is entirely, I mean, it's for all intents and purposes unrelated to the worldview that the person writing those rituals had about how the universe works. You know, in all likelihood, that queen fairy was part of a different tradition in which she was working in a different way altogether, right? And here comes a Solomonic magician and whips them up and constrains them and controls them, which is an incredibly offensive thing for many, like for people at a personal level, but also spiritually speaking, the idea that these guys are essentially coming in and controlling our gods, you know. But that's exactly what Solomonic magic is proposing it's doing. Like, it's not saying anything else. Like, it's entirely saying that we are controlling your gods by using this formula here. And, that's not something that, you know, obviously will go well with many people. So that's the crazy thing that I was talking about.
One of the things that was really interesting to me was a way that you prescribed in the book for aspirants or operators to build a relationship with Lucifer. And it involves a certain procedure, finding a tree with very deep roots and maybe a few drops of blood. Can you talk about what is the central importance of that in the book, and why is it so important in that triad with Lucifer, obviously? Why is it so important to develop that relationship, and why was that specific ritual put in the book?
That ritual is the closest that you're going to see of Obeah in that book. Like, that's not Obeah. Like, there's not a prescription in Obeah that I know of. And again, generically speaking, that you would have to approach a tree to ask for Lucifer specifically. There are other things that relate to that tree, yes, but not that. But I think we discussed this briefly before, but the purpose of that ritual is for you to conjure a dream for yourself, a dream messenger. So it's a lighter approach, because the envoys of Lucifer, they're not the sort of thing that you will manage to tame with this kind of formula. Like, you may as well forget it. Like, you will, or you may think you will, and it may actually appear to be working, and they will destroy you if you do. Like, they will absolutely ruin you. They have ruined much, much bigger people than most of us. They have, like, if you crack open a Bible and you start reading about what happened to these people who decided that they were going to get cute, like, people have been driven insane. People have been driven out of society. People have driven sick. People have lost everything. Like, this is not the group of an alleyway of spirits that you will explore with constraints like this, and it will go well for you. What you're doing with that dream conjuration is you're following a certain formula that we know it works, and by we I mean certain Obeah people know it works, for you to pull out a dream through that tree. Because that tree has, by the way, I recommend a Seba tree, which is the one that I'm talking about there. But if that tree has a certain power associated with itself that it can pull up, you can pull them up with certain rituals, and then you can use that to give yourself dreams and contact. And I'm saying dreams because if you try to evoke them, it will go bad for you. So if you evoke and you play at that, and it works for you, and it may not work for you, to be honest, but if it does work for you, it will be very beneficial, because from that point on, what's going to happen is that messenger will tell you, okay, use so-and-so name when calling Lucifer, and use so-and-so name when calling Beelzebub, and use these things. When you do that, it will essentially be a very effective form of constraint for them. But that is a massive departure from you simply saying, by Lucifer, I conjure you, or by whoever other chief, Like, I mean, look, you can do it. That's the thing that I was alluding to in the book. I said, it's all well and good that we now know that the spirits were once in the hierarchy, but it's a very different story. You actually trying to obtain a direct line with, or a semi-direct line with that spirit, for seeking a favor to then conduct that kind of operation. It's a very, that is, in some respects, that is a bit of a initiatory procedure, but it shouldn't be seen as that, and it should not be confused for an initiation. I mean, you may find that kind of thing later in the work, perhaps, but in principle, what's that doing is it's trying to hook you up with a very potent spirit for you to work the magic more easily.
I'm wondering, you detail at the end of the book, Giulio, some different relationships and different experiences that you had with various spirits, and I'd have to look in the book. I can't remember. I think about 5 different spirits that you mention at the end of the book, Malphas being one of them. Why did you pick these spirits at the end of the book to share a little bit about, and why did you want readers to really understand, or what did you want them to understand about these specific spirits?
There was some purpose associated with me wanting to convey the spells, which I wrote alongside the spirits. They're useful on their own. I have prescribed that to people before I wrote the book, and some people have had excellent success with them. But the other part of the purpose is I want to give people some perspective on how these things should go. As in, this is exactly how one of these experiences is going to happen. They will appear, they will have these shapes, and look, much, much more could have been said. I had very, very impactful experiences after I submitted the final draft of the book, perhaps a few weeks after that. And I kind of wish, to be honest, that I had waited another 2 weeks so they could be in it. But nevertheless, I think for what the mission behind that kind of thing, it has been fulfilled. And I wanted to tell people, look, this is how it's going to happen. And these are the possibilities that you're going to have when you meet these spirits. You can ask them for magic, you can ask them for spells, you can ask for procedures, there are things you can do. They can tell things about history to you, they can tell things about places, they will. And this is the kind of expectation you should have. So, and also in part, naturally, to distance these, weird, simple evocations that are not even evocations, right, from what I'm talking about there. So, to my metric, unless you are actually doing things that will result in more or less these things, so something to the effect of this, then you should keep working on it or move on to a different thing altogether, because this is evocation. This is it. This is going to happen. They will appear to you, they will give you things, and they will talk to you about things.
And that touches, Giulio, on something that you say, that you detail in the book, that you say is unknown in the Solomonic corpus, and that is the black table. Now, I know, obviously, I would really encourage, listeners to pick up the book to get the full explanation, because it is only there that you'll really understand it. But just to give us a brief overview, Giulio, what is the black table, and what would you like listeners to know about it in terms of the importance in your book?
The black table is a bonus chapter added to the book. It could as well have been written without it, and the essence of it would have been conveyed. But I thought that people want to do group work a lot. I get it a lot when I speak to people, and I think that is an excellent way for you to start. And also, there are different traditions. A black table is a thing beyond what I wrote there. There are traditions of magic that use black table as some means to contact demons and contact spirits and get them to do favors for you as well. There are things that somewhat resemble the intention in Trinidadian traditions as well, in which they work the same set of lower spirits that you work in the Solomonic magic, but in a different tradition altogether, in which people get possessed by intermediaries of these demons. But the reason why I'm even mentioning that is because these other more spiritist approaches, they are legit, like they will work, but you will still have to, unravel the contact. You will still have to work on the purity of the space. You will still have to be judicious about who's coming, who's manifesting when you're doing the session. You will still have to do all these things. So that is the intent of that, is for groups of people to really explore working with these demons and as a group. And there's a usefulness of, once contact happens and there's a group of 4 people, 5 people in the room, nobody's going to walk out questioning or wondering what happened. Everybody will know what happened. Like, you will definitely know what went on there. So it's exciting. Like, I think if you do that well, and look, often people ask me about the ritual, and I say, look, the ritual is really simple, but what's going to be difficult is finding honest people to do it with you and do it for a long period of time. That's going to be very hard. And because people have, they live their lives to do different things. And unless this is a really important thing to you, you're not going to keep coming back to it, especially if nothing's happening in the first number of attempts that you do, So, but yeah, the black table is another avenue altogether. And it's one particularly suited for groups to work these spirits. And, I didn't mention much of what happens when you work them in that way, because I more or less want to see what's going to happen when people start doing this thing. And because, look, yeah, there's some element of this could go in a number of ways, but nevertheless, it's spirit work again, and the outcome is going to be up to you, to what you see.
Did you, in your evocation work, putting in so much effort, did you have to go through any kind of period of initial, nothing's happening, maybe initial failure, initial, gosh, I put in all this time and effort, and I'm doing all this right, and I think I'm doing it all right, and nothing happened, and then coming back the next time and trying again and again? Or can you just talk about why is it so important for people listening and reading your book to really fortify themselves and really push through even failure?
Yeah, it's a given that it will, you can pretty much count on it failing. And it will not work for quite likely some time, because, as I said before, for you to nail down the environment correctly, and then for you to do a good performance, and for you to orchestrate all these variables into something that translates into the spirit appearing, that's like, unless it's a skill you already have, because you're a gifted person, in all likelihood, you will have to learn and you have to get good at it, and then things will work. But I have had operations fail even recently, like these things happen, and those were new spirits, and those were spirits that were just absolutely unwilling to appear, and no matter like the amount of constraints I threw at them and things that I did, and then they curse back and they hurt you, and they will come haunt you, and they will really come for you after that. If you do it and it fails, and you keep pressing and you keep angering them and you keep doing these things, and if you pack a punch, especially with, as in, you have spirits that work for you who are then throwing at them, and they are feeling it, they will hunt you down to get you to stop doing that thing. There's a lot in there that even in recent times have happened that weren't pleasant at all. And then in the end, I gave up. In the end, I just went, okay, I can't work with that. So I'll come back to this perhaps a year from now when I'm in a better place, hopefully, and then I can see about what's in there. But nevertheless, you can essentially expect very well that these things aren't going to just produce apparitions just because you got the right gear and you did it 1 or 2 times. Evocations are, as even the sources corroborate that a lot, like they will take many hours and they may fail, and you're going to have to come back and you have to punish them sometimes to get them to appear to you, which is, by the way, not something I recommend doing with Demon, because that pathway that I'm presenting for people is a safe and good pathway for it to work. That thing which you should strive not to make things aggressive with Demon, to avoid closing that path. Because if you do close that path, as in, if you get aggressive and she's not appearing because you're making a few elemental mistakes with your operation, and then you get aggressive anyway. The spirit doesn't really care about that. You're just attacking them, and the spirit will shut it down for yourself. And I mean, you may be able perhaps in a few years' time to come back to them from a position of power because you managed to work some other spirit in this equation, but I can't then guarantee what's going to happen with you and that, how that's going to go and whatnot. But anyway, I was just trying to say that you should probably not try to attack her, but in general, you have to, evocation is a process that's inherently not amicable to spirits, and you have to be expecting to be able to put in a lot of hours, a lot of work, and to get aggressive if need be. That's a general idea.
I know in the past on the podcast we've had different guests talking about Catholic exorcisms and Islamic-based exorcisms and Catholic magic. And in the book you mentioned, quote, a good part of the Catholic rite of exorcism consists of reminding the spirit of their limited power on earth, which is a radical departure from the unorthodox and outright heretical belief of magicians who deemed them to be capable of bringing riches or revealing the future. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on this, if you can go a little bit more in depth in terms of talk about how you see the rite of exorcism in terms of actual, like, the Catholic Church versus exorcism as being something that a magician does in terms of moving spirits around. And you earlier touched on this, but what are your thoughts on that, about exorcism in general?
First and foremost, I'm not an exorcist, so I'm speaking from my perception of knowing some of the things they do. I'm not speaking from, I've done an exorcism, this is how it is. Like, I actually think there are better people than me to answer that question. But for my answer, I think is that one important element of the Catholic exorcism is that the spirit is constantly reminded that anything they do by grant of God. They don't do because, otherwise they wouldn't be able to. So essentially the priests are, obviously by the time that you're exorcising something, the spirit has already done things, so that is somewhat contradictory, but so that's the curse part of what I mean. They are actually going, no, actually forget about the stuff you did. And you can't do it. You can't do it because God won't let you. God hasn't allowed you to. We're saying so, and so on. So, and then they're in their fear, cower back and go, okay, actually, I better not go there because I will be punished if I do. And, but again, the essence of the statement is that you have no power unless the power that God gives you, right? You can't do things. You can't do anything. As a matter of fact, you're a slave. You are nothing. And that's what they're reducing the spirits to. Whereas in magic, you are exploring their agency in this world. You are exploring what they can do. So you're going a very different way about the whole thing. You are essentially already believing that they can do many things, that they are powerful entities in this world, which definitely disagrees with canon in the sense that, disagrees with canon, but it does to a degree disagree with the canon in that demons are out there doing whatever they want, which is not exactly what the Bible says. The Bible says that they're many times they imply they're on earth to test us, which is a different story altogether than giving us treasure.
The concept of spirit movement is something that is common to both exorcism and being a magician, but with a magician it sounds like in terms of spiritual engagement and spiritual movement, you're entering a very, very deep world that is incredibly layered. Can you talk about that?
I was alluding to something that I read in a study by Christopher Plaisance in which he talks about it. The study is actually about the PGM, which I don't want to draw a relationship with Solomonic magic for several reasons, but what Plaisance identified is that there were a number of spells that all sent spirits forth to do things for you. Essentially, that's what they boiled down to, a command that was either imprinted on a piece of lead or a paper or and then follow with prayers and whatnot. So these spells, again, that word is a bit broad, but these operations that's what they did. So essentially the agency of a magician was to move spirits, to send them forth or to call them forth to the magician to answer questions, which falls within the realm of divination. And all these things were within the capacity of a magician. So when I say a magician is a mover of spirits, this is what I'm alluding to. Like once you develop mastery over these things, you're going to realize that being a magician is in many ways about sending spirits forth to do things for you, calling them forth to tell you things. And, everything revolves around that idea. So you are a mover of spirits in the sense that when you speak, they will come, and when you tell them to go, they will go. But you become that. You will become that in time with skill and control over these spirits.
And I can't remember if it was you or Dr. Al when you were talking with Gordon about Solomonic magic, but there was a comment made that the spirits don't want, as you say, they don't want to be bound, and they might do things to throw off a potential magician from even doing that if they can sense they're getting close. And someone mentioned, I can't remember if it was you or Dr. Al, about there's this tendency that the spirits might want you to be an armchair magician. They might do things that will make you, instead of doing a ritual and, like you say, just going for it, there are certain energetic patterns or whatever that might make you, here, instead of going into the circle, why don't you read about a grimoire for 25 years on an armchair? Like, do you think that spirits will, in your experience, have they done things like that to prevent themselves from getting bound or dissuading people?
Well, it's a credible argument, I find. Like, I can't remember who said that in that occasion as well, but I find that to be quite potentially true. Like, that's also named in the Folger manuscript, that they will test your resolve and that they will do these things, like they will do that. And it's entirely in their nature and it's entirely more savvier for them to just test you and then do nothing than to yield and do a lot for you. So they will always go for the path of least resistance in any case. So they will not come over waving a flag going, yes, I will help you because I want to. That's just not going to happen. And I think that, they will, look, they affect your mind in many ways. I think even from within a circle. And as I was saying, like, with the work of another king that I did recently, like even from within the circle, even with everything, all the precautions in place, like the illusions that the spirit gave me were gigantic. And as in, there were walls in the room that I wasn't seeing at all. Like, I was seeing entire different scenarios to the direction, like a whole, like, beaches and mountains and things and like sunsets and many things happen like that in which I couldn't potentially be seen because I was in a dark room, They will affect your mind for sure. And so it stands to reason for me that they can affect your mind in a number of ways that would entail them getting you not to bind them. And look, even if you do, and that's I was trying to say earlier, that the question of identity of spirits is very serious. Like, it can really happen and you get a spirit that isn't the one you call forth, and then they will trick you. They will simply say, yes, I am that guy, and I will give you things if you do so and so for me as well. And then they will never give you anything. Like, they will always make up a next story for you, and then they will, and that's, and we're talking here about someone who has succeeded at evocation being tricked. That can entirely happen. So you see how gnarly this whole thing is. Like, it's not very easy at all. It's not for no reason, I think, that magicians were rare, because you're going to have to do some difficult work there to find out. And even there's a upcoming book that I'm told, the excellent book of art magic, which is it's a diary plus a formulae that it's a grimoire in a nutshell. And the book tells in the diary part about these two magicians that were calling forth the kings. I mean, they started the operation in a very different way than I would, but they started with the kings and Orions specifically. And then they tested Orions a lot. Like, they significantly grilled the spirit to find out if Orions is Orions really. So, and there is a very strong point for that kind of thing, because if you don't get the right spirit, they will trick you. Like, they will really make up stuff and you will not get anything and you will be unproductive. So you need to be prepared for that kind of thing. It's difficult. Like, it's more difficult than just calling for it, in my experience at least.
Something that a lot of people say about the Solomonic tradition, Giulio, is it's a broken tradition and it's a broken technology, meaning that repression by the church and a lack of master-apprentice, which you allude to in the book, has basically broken the technology, and that Solomonic magic as a technology, as a system, is nowhere near as consistent as, say, Taoist magicians in China or Southeast Asia, where there's some sources documenting them going back, 36 generations of master-apprentice. So I guess my question is the Solomonic tradition as broken as people think it is? And if so, do you think that books like yours can kind of help restore the quote-unquote Solomonic tradition to what it perhaps used to be before it was broken?
Well, I think if you're going to compare with lineages of Taoist magicians that go for generations, And if you're going to compare that to initiatory traditions in the New World, which also have gone through generations, and if you're going to compare Solomonic magic in general with these things, you're more likely really to find power in these other traditions than you are to find in it, because you are comparing manuals detailing certain specific approaches with entire traditions, which are really, much more elaborate than just them. So, of course, these other things are always gonna, in terms of the realness of the power behind it, in principle, yes, they will definitely be bigger, no doubt, but I don't think it's broken at all. The work that I have done isn't from a special source that I found somewhere that is better. I essentially did the work that was in the grimoires, and the realignment that I mentioned earlier happened, of course, with the benefit of insight into what I should do, but that is all that happened. And still, what was done are things that you will find in the grimoire. So essentially, what I did at the end of the day, in practice, what happened is I did the work from the grimoire. It's not, it wasn't like with any privilege or with an alliance that made something that would otherwise not work. It definitely wasn't. So I think a lot of people use and they put forth the argument that the tradition is broken because the next thing they will say to you is that they have a fix for it. And that's something that I'm actually alluding to in the book. It's funny how these fixes, they're all somewhat a lot easier to do than the actual thing, and look, to each their own, I'm not going to convince people to not do something that somebody else is saying. If they want to, go ahead and do it. But I'm just saying that you can't believe that evocation is going to be like, unless you met some secret master coming down from the skies who can tell you super insider information on these things, which is unlikely an event, unless that's actually what has happened, you can pretty much take that with a grain of salt, because it will likely not cover the things that an evocation operation does. And the manuscripts that we have access to nowadays, they are excellent. We have access to excellent translations in English of books that people, even 50 years ago, you will be lucky to have one of them. And people may do, this isn't a tradition that spent hundreds of years without being worked. It has been worked. And people have been doing these things. So, and they have been doing with fewer manuscripts than we have been. So I really don't think it's broken. But what I think it is, it's discontinued in a large part. And that's again in the public sphere. I'm aware of groups performing these operations in secret and it has been going on for a long time for these people. So I think the idea that we're talking about a dead tradition, we're really talking about in the public sphere, it's a dead tradition, but it's not a dead tradition in so far as, certain private groups of people have been treating it.
Giulio, as we wrap up here, can you share with us some advice that you might have for people either just starting out on the ceremonial magic path? What are the things that they should always do or keep in mind? Or conversely, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that you think rookies might mess up on or have a mistake with?
First thing it would be, I think you have to decide and try your best to find the things you're passionate about. I had occasion to respond that same question recently on a different interview, and I think that is, pun intended, that's king. You really have to come first from an angle of wanting that so much and so bad that you will be willing to work through the difficulties and then get a hang of it from conducting an experiment that belongs to you and over a long period of time. Because there's the one thing you cannot do, I would say, is confuse cross-sectional studies, which is the kind of study that comes from comparing 6+ grimoires with doing a longitudinal study, which is working one over a long period of time. I think no matter where you go, no matter where you get your facts from, it will always come down to being able to execute an operation over a very long period of time and figuring it out. No matter where you go with this. In any event, you will still need to be willing to have the patience to work that through. And I am fairly convinced that evocation magic isn't something that even most people would find appealing. In the end, it's so much work and people are, in their minds, they're skipping to the part where everything is great. And that's similar, for instance, in many ways, it's similar to opening a company, which, to be honest, in certain countries, it can be very difficult to do. You're imagining that opening a company will make you rich and you're going to have an awesome life at some point in the future, right? That may well happen, but understand and ask anyone who's been in business for a long time that, and you may find out that not a lot of people want really to open a company at all. They may actually decide that it's not for them after they do it for some time. And to come back to evocation, I find that it's a very difficult thing to do, which you need to gauge whether you're not confusing the end result with the road that's going to be in between no matter what. So, and if you decide that this is for you, if you really go, well, okay, I am passionate about this and I will, then really face it with an honest mind and really approach, if you have the sources, and you probably will do if you buy a few books, then really it's not so much a question of ordering tradition for its own sake, but you owe it to yourself to be honest and not pretend that you know a lot about it by evaluating aspects of one grimoire or the other as more or less relevant. If you have not worked a grimoire, you do not know what's in it. You don't know. Anyone's capable of reading the words and understanding what they say. That's one thing, If you're going to tread that path, there will be much more knowledge underneath everything. And no one who hasn't worked a grimoire can tell what's underneath that until they have.
Magister Officiorum is your book. In addition to Scarlet Imprint and your book, Giulio, where else can you share where people can find you, your writings online, if they'd like to find out more about upcoming projects, anything like that? What would you like them to know?
Probably the journal, which is aka blog. That's probably going to be the place where I'm going to actually be talking about anything magic related. Like I've been making a point of not discussing much magic in social media in the last year at least, mostly because a lot of these things aren't a matter of debate. Like if you've done it, then okay. Like I'm personally interested in hear what people who have actually worked this have to say about it, because it's always interesting to see what happened to other people. It adds to the whole thing, but I'm also at the same time aware that very, very few people will do that kind of thing. So to answer the question, probably the blog is the place. So I'll be sharing the address with you, I believe, later. So yeah.
The new book is Magister Officiorum, and Giulio, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Glitch Bottle podcast. We really hope to have you again on very soon.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Yes, that is thanks to you for listening and subscribing to the Glitch Bottle podcast. I have to say, I am humbled and overjoyed by the amount of support, input, comments, feedback, and inspiration that you, the listener, provide every single day to the podcast. So thank you once again, and please always make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/glitchbottle. As well, you can always subscribe to Glitch Bottle on iTunes and Spreaker.com, and you can always check out my new website, glitchbottle.com, which I hope will act as a kind of repository for blog posts and podcast episodes. And this episode, as always, is dedicated to you, the listener and subscriber, wherever you are. That means if you're in your occult lairs, your summoning towers, or other locations of the esoterically awesome. And until next time, this is Alexander F., reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.